So welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. So I'm Nadia. I'm conference director here at LSX. So thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today on the future of life sciences VC, examining specialist versus hyper-targeted investment strategies. Really nice to see you all. I know we have folks from across the globe, Europe and US. So really pleased to have you. Our next LSX event is LSX Nordic, which is running in Bergen, Norway on May 20th and 21st. So would love to have you all with us. If you do have any questions for the webinar today, please do post them in the chat. We're going to leave some time at the end just to get to those. But thank you again for being here. And yeah, let's start the discussion. So I want to hand over to Farzad Abdi Desfouli, who's founding partner at Sarsia. So he's hosting and moderating this webinar today. So over to you, Farzad.
Thanks. Wonderful, Nadia. Thanks a lot. So first of all, I'd like to thank Nadia and LSX for giving me and Sarsia the opportunity to host and moderate this discussion regarding a topic which I'm sure a lot of people have been asking, namely what works best in terms of life science VCs today. So basically asking, is it broad specialization or deep hyper targeting, and basically what gives best returns, lowest risks, and most meaningful innovations. And obviously, there's no single answer to that, and that's what makes the whole discussion so interesting. But really, my hope is that people after this discussion would have basically three takeaways, and just to kind of state those, I think what is important is basically to understand what the trade-offs are between specialists versus hyper-targeted, as we've termed them, VC models. Secondly, to be able to give real-world examples of drivers, outcome metrics, and decision logics for fund GPs, LPs, and entrepreneurs looking at this topic. And finally, as a last takeaway, if you will, I'm hoping that we could shine some light in terms of future direction for life science investments, and basically which direction we see this heading, as it were. But before all of that, I'd just like to say how really grateful and pleased I am to have been able to gather such an incredibly competent and sharp group of thinkers and doers around the table here from across the life science investment landscape. So I'd like to just ask everyone if they could please just to give a brief intro of themselves, including basically your name, your role in your organization, and for the investors, your investment focus. And I can be so bold actually to start myself. So I'm Farzad Desfouli, as Nadia mentioned, one of the founding partners in Sarsia back in 2006. So Sarsia is a Norwegian early stage venture capital fund. I would say that we are the largest early phase investor in Norway, but we're increasingly looking towards the Nordics and Europe proper, as it were, in terms of having a footprint there as well. And in terms of I think one of the things that I would like also for the participants to have some words about is actually why this topic matters to you, and also to say some words in terms of, or a statement, if you like, that people you would like to bring to the conversation in terms of why this is important to myself and Sarsia, is basically because we have traveled this journey. We started very broad back in 2006 when we first started. And fast forward to today, we have become far more specific and in terms of the scope that we're looking at. And with our fourth fund that we're actually working on, that will be very specialized and kind of hyper focused, if you like, on specific areas. So yeah, that's enough about me. So again, coming back to the panel. So I don't know if Boke, you want to carry on?
Yeah, of course. Happy to continue here. Thank you, Farzad, and thank you for the organizers for the invite. So I'm Bauke. I'm an investment director with M Ventures. We're the corporate venture arm of Merck KGaA in Germany. We are currently investing out of a 600 million allocation across tech and biotech. More relevant for this discussion is our biotech focus, where we invest across therapeutics and life sciences tools and tech. We have done so for about 15 years, invested in over 100 companies, and do that globally. I think this topic is certainly of interest because we kind of continuously review our kind of investment scope and process, and it's an organic process that continuously evolves. Obviously, as the corporate venture arm of Merck, our strategy is aligned with the Merck strategy, but we see ourselves also as a function to kind of input and inform that strategy. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I'll hand over to the next panelist.
Great, thank you. Morgan, do you want to carry on?
Sure, happy to. And thank you all for having me on the panel today. My name is Morgan Haller. I'm a principal at Forbion, in particular focused on the growth strategy that we have there at Forbion. We are currently investing out of a 1.2 billion euro fund that we raised in the second half of last year. And, similar to Bauke, we're very much focused on the biotech side of things, in particular in therapeutics. And, we're also very much constantly re-evolving our investment strategy and taking additional inputs to refine that. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Perfect, thanks. Esther, do you want to carry on?
Yes. Thank you for having me here. Pleasure. My name is Esther Cafarel Salvador. I'm the Director of Strategic Innovation at Chiesi. Chiesi is an Italian pharma company, and some of you might know it for our respiratory programs. However, 5 years ago, a new business unit focused on rare diseases was created, and this is where I sit in. A bit of more context onto that is just like the rare diseases pipeline that we have now 10 products in the market has been built by acquisition or in licensing only. We don't really have a pipeline of our own. So we are constantly engaging with companies and understand their assets and see what would be a best fit for our pipeline on rare diseases specifically. And as part of the strategic innovation, we are looking at new therapeutic modalities. So all our assets are small molecules and biologics, but my team is building the long-term pipeline and therefore just looking at the new modalities. So gene editing, gene therapy, delivery vectors, and so on to treat potentially diseases in a curable way. So pleasure to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, great to have you, Esther. Willem, would you like to carry on there, please?
Yes, happy to do that, Farzad, and thanks for having me on the panel. Willem van Wepperen, I'm the CEO of Pluvia Biotech, based in Bergen, and having Sarsia as our largest investor. So representing the earlier stage companies, we're focused on PKU, a rare genetic disease where patients are not able to eat proteins and where a solution is really needed to improve their life. And I've been always working in the rare genetic disease space from the mid-90s in Genzyme, where we kind of pioneered the orphan drug model. And through my career, I've been involved in earlier stage and definitely in later stage commercialization. So for this discussion, indeed, the rare genetic disease space is I guess maybe the most hyper-focused area. So interesting to make a plea for that area of investment, but also to discuss what the pros and cons are of that rare genetic disease area.
Terrific, thanks. And last but not least, Jonathan.
Hi, thanks, Farzad. It's such a pleasure to be here. And as the only American on this panel, I will just simply state that data-driven, rational, ethical behavior will again fully prevail, I'm sure, in the life sciences and elsewhere. And I'm privileged to be able to be a part of this panel and also interact, as always, as I've done extensively for almost 2 decades with your part of the world. So thank you very much for the invitation. My background, I suspect, like pretty much everybody on the call, is a very extensive academic one. I was a vascular surgeon and associate professor of surgery at Harvard and at the Mass General for many years and ran our vascular labs, research and diagnostic, but really migrated over to this world. Ran healthcare investment banking groups after a little stint in venture for about a decade, and then founded Back Bay Life Science Advisors, which I think, as many of you know, is very active in the Nordics, as well as a global integrated strategy consulting and investment banking firm focused on licensing, partnering, and M&A. Recently partnered very extensively and formally with DNB, Oslo headquartered, but global as well, to really expand the offering. I'm also a partner in a growth capital medtech health tech fund that is a couple months away from its close, targeting about $250 million in total assets under management for late stage. Certainly we'll have a focus in the Nordics as well as the rest of the world in the US in that, and have done several company startups, one successfully exited, one in progress in the health tech space. So an area that we're discussing today is one that's near and dear to my heart across a number of parameters. And I feel very, very lucky to be here on this discussion.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. This is wonderful. So I mean, as people see, I mean, we've tried to put the composition of the panel basically to reflect the question, really. And obviously, you know, to have Esther on board and Willem, you know, talking about hyperfocus and basically they represent, you know, that sector of the field, as it were. So basically, just to jump into it, basically, I think so. I'd like to kind of move on and actually, I mean, I think the first point of call is defining what exactly we are discussing here. So I mean, again, just coming back to you, Jonathan, do you have any kind of reflections on the kind of, does it make any sense to use these terminology? And do you see any kind of evolution of these terms, you know, looking at it historically and where we are today?
So I think the terms are worth having. I don't think any of us should be dogmatic about the way we approach investing in companies. You know, and I think it's very hard to talk about specialization or hyper specialization unless you also talk about it in the context of the lens through which you're looking, the stage at which you're looking, et cetera. So I do believe, I'm going to say this somewhat emphatically, that funds that are aggregated but are focused across numerous verticals, medtech, health tech, biotech, specialty pharma, I think those are the least effective methodologies, because I think you have partners that come together in those funds and can't really evaluate and pressure test against each other. That has nothing to do with a family of funds that divides into verticals and has investment committees that serve those verticals. I worry about hyper specialization, and perhaps this is counterintuitive at the very early stage, because I think it's like taking aim at a target 2 miles away. If you're off by an inch, you can miss by a mile. And it may be that it's a bit of false precision to think that the most in-depth, narrow focus will get you the best returns. Venture is an orchestral job. It's an orchestral conducting job. And I'll make this my last statement so that I don't keep ranting. But I think our job goes across the parameters of finance strategy, of development strategy, of prioritization strategy, of commercial and KOL alliance strategy, of structuring strategy, because at the end of the day, we are serving our limited partners as well as a sector. And then lastly, patient centricity. And I'm not sure asking a group of people to be fully hyper-specialized in the purely clinical or scientific sense serves the purpose of being able to advance companies which need constant reaction across all of those parameters. So that tends to be my view. However, last comment, I was with somebody the other day who's founding a company solely based on pediatric diseases, solely based on women's health. And Esther, as you talked about with rare diseases, those are not necessarily hyper-specialized, but they serve a very interesting financial and social purpose that I think has great importance. But I think the ecosystem has room for all of this.
Could I just pass that on to you, Bouke? Do you have any opinions on this point?
Certainly, yeah. No, it was interesting, kind of preparing for this panel. and reflecting on kind of our strategy and where do we fit in, right? Are we specialists? Are we hyper focused? I think in some aspect we're a little bit of both. We certainly have a focus that continues to to be true as we look to kind of review companies that approach us. So we have a certain TA focus, right? We would invest in areas where Merck is active. So that's mostly in oncology, immunology, neuro, and fertility. So one may call that focus, but at the same time, it's actually fairly broad. But there are areas where we wouldn't do. And I think the benefit of having a focus and a specialization that's, to some extent, it's easier to kind of build a certain expertise, spot patterns, and be a helpful partner to companies that we invest in. So we're certainly in discussions with early stage companies looking for financing. We see that as a value add, right? We believe we have some domain knowledge in the areas that we invest in. And I think that helps us be a better partner to the companies that we invest in. At the same time, it's always good to keep your eyes open and not miss out on opportunities that are maybe not fully in scope, but could be really nice ways to kind of learn about the new area and a new space. So in that sense, we are always open to kind of engaging with companies that are not exactly in our sweet spot, just to learn and to continue evolving our investment thesis.
Great, thanks. And finally, I mean, Morgan, I know Forbion actually started the same time that we did back in 2006. So I'm just curious, to what kind of evolution you guys have had.
Yeah, I mean, our evolution is gone over time, right? It's gone also from a broader scope. We initially did not only therapeutics, but also in areas such as devices and diagnostics and things like that. But I think, we've narrowed that over time to, we can still do the diagnostics and the devices, but I think our main focus is more on the therapeutic area. But, zooming out, I think from our perspective, I think it just depends on what lens you're looking through to define Forbion, right? If you're looking at the broader VC space, we're hyper-focused. We're looking only at pharmaceuticals in that area. But if you zoom down into healthcare, we're more specialists. And I think if you look at therapeutics, we're more generalist, right? So we're pretty much therapeutic area agnostic, and when you're juxtaposing that to what Bauke was talking about with ventures. So that enables us to cast a wider net within the therapeutic space. And the way our platform is set up, we have a number of different strategies underneath the Forbion platform that enables us to cover the full spectrum of the disease and the development cycle effectively. So we have our affiliate BGV that's going very early in seed stage investments and company formation. Our ventures group is one that is focused on preclinical and pre-proof of concept in the clinic, and then the growth strategy where I sit, that's more in the clinical side of things, from proof of concept and de-risk biology to commercial. So we're able to kind of span all of that, and then underneath all that one roof, we have been able to assemble quite a team with different diverse backgrounds within the therapeutic space. People who have different backgrounds in oncology, immunology, various different areas where we can leverage. And we're not only leveraging those people, we're leveraging our advisors and our operating partners as well, who have vast experience in different areas. So that enables us to be able to cover a very broad therapeutic area map.
Right. Right.
If I may add as well, obviously, Chiesi, we focus on rare diseases, and you could think that this is hyper targeted. However, within rare diseases in our pipeline, we have a very diverse therapeutic areas focus. So we focus on endometabolic, we have hematology, immunology, dermatology, ophthalmology, and all inborn errors of metabolism, including lysosomal storage disorders. And this is because, historically, we've been opportunistic with the opportunities that we've gone after. Obviously, there are over 10,000 rare diseases, and we would love to have solutions for all of them. But many times, obviously, we focus on the expertise that we have in-house. And through these acquisitions, maybe the most recent with Amryt Pharma a couple of years ago, we brought products that fit in our portfolio. However, they additionally had an asset in dermatology. So that was not our core expertise, and we kept growing, right? And we just leveraged those networks. So with that regard, we obviously want to reach as many patients as possible. And specifically with my team looking at new therapeutic modalities, hopefully, since those are platforms and could be translatable to treat various diseases, we'll be able to broaden this further.
Terrific. So wonderful. So I think this is a good segue actually into the next topic that I'd like to touch upon, and basically looking at the drivers, if you like, of each strategy. So basically looking at GPs, LPs, risks, and not least the market forces involved here. And so on that note, I'm just curious. So obviously, Bouke, coming from M Ventures and your LP, Merck, as it were. I'm just curious, what kind of dynamics or kind of expectations in terms of capital allocation do you see, on your end?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, look, I mean, we've grown over the years, right? We started out as a smaller 45-50 million euro fund, and have grown that to the current 600 million fund. So clearly there's an appetite to kind of expand the platform and do more. That's all from one single LP, right? As a corporate venture group, we have Merck as our LP, and and I think that comes with both a strategic and a financial mandate and expectation. So in order for us to continue investing, it's good that we continue returning capital to Merck as well. At the same time, every investment there is kind of a confirmation that there is some interest from Merck in these companies, right? It's an area that Merck likes, that they are active in, and see them potentially partnering in the future with these companies. Now, every investment comes with no strings attached. It's a plain vanilla financial investment, but at the same time, there is a confirmation that there is some interest in the technology, the therapeutic area, the modality. So that's kind of how we interact, like many other of our corporate VC colleagues. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question, but that's certainly, given the platform has grown and we've returned a healthy amount of money, I think that's certainly an interest to do more of that.
Right. Great. Thanks. So I'd just like to ask actually Esther and Willem on the next point. I mean, question in terms of, so obviously you guys represent the orphan targeted members of the panel, and I'm just curious, how your reflections on how focused investors can make a real difference, supporting breakthrough cases, if you like. To what extent does that make a difference, both in terms of Willem being a prospect which is supported through VC, but not least, Esther, who is an acquisition kind of actor, if you like, to what extent that play a role in terms of how you guys actually, the lens that you look through.
Yeah.
So,
Esther, shall I kick it off from the smaller company side? So yeah, I think it's super important to be able to talk with funds and with companies that have that knowledge of the rare disease space. So, I think Jonathan already mentioned patient centricity as an important part, knowledge also about all the regulatory and clinical opportunities. So, starting with the orphan drug designation and rare pediatric disease designation that we also have at Pluvia, but also next steps about, the conditional approval pathways and how can you, get faster to the market with surrogate endpoints and have a commitment for that conditional approval to make that a full approval. So all that knowledge is important to have in a VC, and also even on the side of pricing, where the US has maybe a more optimistic pricing scenario than Europe has. That knowledge needs to be on the other side of the table, and it's not easy to find that when you're early stage. So as Jonathan said, if you have the very narrow focus with the early stage funds, then maybe you're shooting behind your target. On the other hand, these companies like us are, with the corporate ventures, they are focused on platforms. The larger fund like Morgan with Forbion are focused on on the clinical assets. So it's really the finding the right funds that are willing to go for the tickets that bring you into clinical proof of concept are those are the most valuable partners to find. So that's what we are targeting on at Pluvia.
Yeah, I think to add like into the rare disease space, obviously like the FDA or regulatory pathway and having opportunities of accelerated approval and orphan drug incentive to reduce the time and risk to market is very important. I'm located in the US, so mostly this is the market that I know, and like it's fairly unstable right now. Like if also given that my focus is in cell and gene therapy, obviously I've been tracking this in the past years, and while it seems that like have been a decline on cell and gene therapy last year, it actually recorded like an increase in investments of about 30%. There were like around 3,000 developers and 2,000 clinical trials in the cell and gene therapy space. Obviously, like things are changing, and like we just got new news on the FDA. Like if the orphan drug designations and other of these expedited tickets are removed, like that might lead to a shift on pivoting of many companies, as we are seeing, diversifying smaller assets and trying to actually maybe repurpose or divest the rare disease pipeline. While a couple of years ago you saw that even big pharma were trying to push through the rare disease route, specifically for new therapeutic modalities, because obviously it's a more the risk way, fast to market that like could serve to validate a platform and then use similar technologies, right, for another treatment. So in our case, I feel like there is like the investment space now. It's just everyone is waiting on what to see like these new recent changes. But I feel like in general, like the appetite is just for validated targets. Like before, companies would IPO with just like something that look very good, like in maybe in vitro or like early in vivo animal models. And now like we have an appetite to make sure that like there are validated targets, either a me too or a me better. In the sense, Chiesi as a company is fairly conservative. So for the assets that we have in the pipeline, we usually buy the companies at late stage clinical trials or having marketed assets already. So my team on new modalities obviously is the only one that is looking more at preclinical, because many of these assets don't have clinical data. However, like as we want to see like a lot of NHP data, at least as much as you can de-risk the company, the closer you are to IND, the better. And I see that this is a general trend that you want it as the risk as possible in order to have these investments.
Terrific. So,
Farzad, may I interject?
I was actually going to ask you, Jonathan. So actually on that point, I mean, in terms of capital cycles, bear market versus bull market kind of thing. So do you have any kind of insight in terms of these models? Which ones kind of do you have any kind of analysis, if you like, of that aspect?
Well, yeah, a couple of recent analyses that I've done. I'll get to in 1 second, but I want to just revert for a moment,
yeah,
because I think it relates to this issue of focus versus hyper-specialization. The function inside of a venture fund, and I think the good ones do this extremely well, and the ones that are not as successful don't do this as well. There are 5 basic functions to break it down. It's sourcing, it's diligencing, it's structuring, it's monitoring, and it's exiting. And I think sourcing is critical, because it should be sourced not based on some old network, but based on truly a proactive approach, which you see in both corporate venture and successful financial investors as well. Diligencing doesn't necessarily have to mean a hyper-specialized partner, but I think, Morgan, you spoke to this. I think having the right coterie of people around you, so that, again, you are a conductor of an orchestra. Structuring is a much more generic function for a fund. However, it still needs to be correlated to the specifics of the growth of a company. And the company needs to be highly aware of its own growth and capital needs in order to conduct that negotiation. And I'll relate that to your question about capital cycles in a second. Monitoring and exiting is, I think, where a lot of funds break down. And this is where greater focus, but not necessarily hyper-specialization, comes in, because that monitoring really involves understanding the sites of trials, understanding the adoption criteria, that leaders in the field will have, and exiting really often depends on true relationships with consolidators. That's best achieved with focus. It can be undermined by hyper-specialization. So I still fall into and I agree, rare disease is not hyper-specialized. When I was in medical school, there were 6 rare diseases. Now there are 10,000. I mean, it's a little bit broader. So, I think those are the things that you have to constantly consider. And the critical comment that I think was made was about size of funding to inflection point. Willem, I think you made that. So to go directly to your question, and I was surprised at this, conventional wisdom will tell you that in down capital cycles, licensing, partnering, and M&A activity will increase. And when capital is more free-flowing, they will decrease because companies will try to raise capital to a greater endpoint and a seemingly higher valuation. When you really do the analytics on that, and we do this all the time, I have to say at Back Bay, you don't necessarily get a better ROI or a better multiple because it entirely depends on the vagaries of the funding cycles that intervene. What is the most critical issue, however, and I think Europe suffers often from undercapitalization, and the Nordics especially, is that you are able to capitalize properly to that inflection point. And if because of limited capital, that means you need to focus indication, you need to parse out clearly the most efficient way to get there. And that can be true in an ultra rare disease, or it can be true in a broad-based cardiovascular play. That to me is far more critical than whether or not you're hyper-specialized or focused. I think that cuts across that categorization. But the principles of working with funds that can fill those 5 functionalities ranging from sourcing all the way through to exiting, and have a highly intelligent and properly analyzed correlation between the science or the development pathway and the vagaries of regulatory, and correlate that to the financing in aggregate and ensure you have a buffer, I think is a far greater predictor of success than is any one specific fund strategy.
Mm-hmm. Again, as I said, this is not, it's a spectrum discussion here. So
yes.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yep.
So wonderful, terrific. Well, thanks for that. So just moving on to the next point, actually. Again, talking about which model is in terms of competitive edge, if you like, is best. So talking about sector, therapeutic areas, stage of development. I'm just kind of curious. So maybe I can pitch this to Esther. So I mean, as an acquirer, do you I mean, is it how do you actually see this point?
Yeah, so I think that we look at many things, obviously, like asset, like market, and all this is like first, like with alignment with company and so on, because most of the times when we not only license an asset, but if we are to acquire a company, like there is also a cultural component and other things, beyond the economics of that opportunity. But obviously, like for specific companies, if there is a strong VC backing up, or like obviously someone that we know that like has already done the due diligence at an earlier stage, like we navigate a lot and have we had a fund of our own, like Chiesi Ventures in the past as well, and like we have teams that are very strong on like this due diligence. So I think it's important to have a deep domain of expertise specifically on what we are looking at, and if not, we seek this expertise, if not within the company, like in relevant sources and partnering. So I think that it's important to look at the competitive landscape and understand the industry insights, where we're going, where does this product fit, like especially ever since we created the strategic innovation unit, we look to the future and always think on like what are novel treatments that could now cannibalize our programs, right? Is a one and done treatment potentially gonna substitute one of the assets in our pipeline? And obviously the answer comes to, it depends on how high the unmet need, right? Like would someone take a gene editing treatment, for example, for once and done? It depends on what's the current standard of care, how inconvenient that is, how is it treatable? Is this a weak weekly infusion that you need to go to the hospital for, right? Like some people might be able to do that, but not everyone has, you know, a white collar job where you can just take some time off and like go to the hospital. There are so many factors to take into this population. So obviously it's a combination and it's on a case by case, but obviously like we just look for the best fit on the pipeline, the impact that we can do in the patients, and making sure that like we are bringing valuable treatments to them. And we don't look at ideally incremental, you know, benefits. We look at like differentiators, superiority, and like making sure that we are making an impact on that disease treatment.
Great.
Yeah, maybe if I can just chime in, Farzad, on the point you made, Esther, around bringing the right kind of groups of people, and a point were made earlier by others, to the table. I think there's kind of increasing scrutiny in today's more challenging market, also on the investor side, to ensure that when you bring a group of investors together to syndicate the financing, that the right group of investors are around the table, bring complementary skills, networks, and expertise, not just from a kind of a tech focus, but also perhaps from a geographic focus. We like partnering with funds that are also local to the company, mostly on the earlier stage side, but kind of across the different stages. But also to ensure that there's, sufficient of capital for follow-on financings around the table. I think that's crucial. Given the challenging market, we need to ensure that we, fund to meaningful inflection points, but also that there is, some sort of a reserves there in order to sustain the company beyond just that financing. And I think that's, what we see is increasing scrutiny, and that leads to, prolonged fundraising timelines. But I think that's important, particularly in today's challenging markets.
Yeah, I'd almost argue, and I would say it's an ethic on the fund side of my life, that management, syndication, and board, financing strategy, and technology, and that order can really be the predictor of outcomes. And if you have a cross-purpose board with different fund ages and different attitudes about how exits need to be engendered and how to stay in, it can create such a terrible food fight around the table. And it's not acrimonious so much as it is just unaligned. And it's the worst thing for a company and for ultimately reducing something to patient care.
Terrific. Wonderful. Well, thanks for that. So I'd like to now kind of switch gears a bit and kind of look at, again, gazing into the crystal ball, like 3 to 5 years into the future, and consider basically, which direction we see the market going in terms of strategy, focus versus diversity, platforms versus assets, and not least the impact of AI and the digital universe, as it were. So I'm just curious. So I mean, if I can, again, Jonathan, you being our analyst in the panel, I'm just curious, could you say anything about, macro trends? Do you see any predictions in that direction?
Yeah, I have to say, I see predictions all the time. I'm a person who hates trend investment. I mean, it reminds me of watching my kids when they were little play soccer games and 11 kids run into the corner after the ball. I don't think it's productive. I think that if you look at successful exits, there's constantly unmet need across fields. There are fields, for instance, that are way more challenging from a venture model. Broad-based population cardiovascular remains something that I think even pharma, although increasingly interested in some of the niche aspects, but even pharma still shies away from to some degree. But I think rather than look for trends in development, we ought to look for a couple of different things. I think that companies form based on, and they should form based on patient need. I do believe that platforms are ultimately more successful because they are sustainable and can recover from failure of an asset that is not developing properly. However, platform for platform's sake, if you look historically, have never really delivered. They're hot cycles and then it disappears. Platforms that can generate real assets that can then be developed and then be backed up in the event of a failure or a revisitation I think are very valuable combination companies. They're disciplined and commercial, but they're far-reaching and recoverable. And let's never forget, I'm going to be historic here, Avastin, I think, failed 25 trials before its utility was finally proven. So I think that's a combination platform asset in terms of future looking. In terms of sector, I really deeply believe that if a company identifies a patient need, identifies the novel means to approach it, not a Me Too means, as has been said earlier today, and then monitors that company against the portfolio of larger companies that are in a similar space, because every space has a company that correlates to it, and tracks where those portfolios are going, tracks where the failures have been, and understands how to fund to the proper inflection point. And that's the analytic that's applied. Then I'm less concerned about whether you're in rare neurology or rare derm, or niche cardiovascular or novel oncologic approach. All of those things remain needs. I think it's the monitoring and the strategy of that development that's far more important, and that's how we counsel across our well more than 1,000 projects at Back Bay. To put on that hat again for a second, we don't counsel toward trend, we counsel toward efficacy, and there's always need across these sectors. So I'll stop with that.
Great, thanks. And Morgan, I mean, in Forbion, could you kind of shine some light in terms of your pipeline building priorities and basically your acquisition strategies in this context?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we look to build out our portfolio, we're consistently looking for opportunities that appeal to our fundamental strategy. And, that's something that despite what's going on in the current world, which is quite unpredictable these days, remains consistent. And that's looking for differentiated assets that are meeting unmet needs and are led by strong teams. And I think that's something that, fundamentally is at the core of Forbion. And, an example of that is Iolis that we exited last year. That was a TSLP asset that we in-licensed out of China. And, one we thought had the ability to, really change the way that disease is treated in asthma. And, we're able to exit that pretty soon thereafter to GSK after we put the Series A to work. But at the same time, we're constantly iterating that strategy, right? So I mean, we would be remiss to not have our eyes open to what's going on today. And I alluded to it earlier, the uncertainty that's currently in the space today. We're certainly cognizant of the changes that are going on there. I mean, I'll give you an example. We recently passed on a vaccine opportunity that, in a different market circumstances would have been very interesting. But given the pushback that's currently there in the U.S. market and the uncertainty that's around that in terms of the FDA, it's just something that we decided, that's something that we can focus on other things at this moment. So, it's a situation where we're, like I said, constantly looking for similar types of fundamental differentiated opportunities, but we're certainly cognizant of what's going on.
Morgan, unpredictability might be the euphemism of the day award.
Exactly.
Terrific, wonderful. Well, thanks for that. So I mean, I'm just wondering, curious, Esther, on your side, the same question.
Yeah, so we look at a lot of platforms, and when I think of platforms, it's more like gene editing can be a platform, right? Like you change the guide RNA for a specific disease, and like that can identify a different region of the genome and correct a specific mutation. But platforms are also like delivery technology. So a nanoparticle could be a platform to deliver many diseases, right? So if that nanoparticle is validated in the clinic, if you only change the cargo, like that's also considered a platform. So we think of these new technologies as platformizable because you can just fine tuning one of the elements, like you can just target different diseases, but leverage already, the output of previous clinical studies in terms of targetability and so on. And, in terms of AI, obviously it's having a great impact on how to develop these platforms, whether to identify suitable guide RNAs, whether to identify the lipid structure of a specific nanoparticle, because it allows for, a lot of testing simultaneously. Like obviously this testing then needs to be, these testing predictions need to be validated in vivo, and that's going there. But obviously the impact that AI has also down the line for implementation of even some therapeutics, right? Like from a regulatory point of view, like the documentation, like reporting side effects or tracking. But I want to bring back the all of this needs to be done with the patient at the center. And like, we are a very patient focused, and sometimes some of these developments of new therapeutics might not take into consideration some of the patient needs. I mean, we were at another panel the other day talking about one for a specific disease. A mattress was designed to record the parameters of a patient while sleeping. Usually those patients are kids, and one thing that the company is developing, or like using this to report the endpoints of a specific therapeutic, they did not consider that those kids sleep with their parents. Therefore, like, whose vitals are being recorded. So I think that AI can play a big role, but like, I think we need to also take a step back and get a better understanding of the patient, not design, therapeutics for the sake of like treating diseases that we think we know. I think like taking an approach on like how is the life of the patient and what are the actual hurdles and like what can really help them. It's an important consideration moving forward.
I want to add that it's great that Chiesi, as kind of a mid-sized rare disease company, is having so much flexibility in seeing where the unmet need is, and actually independent from manufacturing. If you go from gene editing to small molecule, etc., it looks like you are willing to go in different directions. And I think for early stage companies, where the financing climate is more difficult, where VCs are maybe more careful, also have to be more careful, then we have to look at companies, at pharma companies, and maybe in our space, maybe the large pharma is not directly the ones that will step into a rare disease opportunity. And so having the opportunity to work with the mid-sized companies, and also you see more and more these early innovation contact persons in different companies. It really is an alternative way for companies at kind of the close to clinical stage to move forward. And that and just prudent management are things that in the coming years will be so important for the companies that are in my kind of area. So good to hear that all.
Terrific.
Maybe I can run it out with some thought. Fully agree with kind of what the fellow panelists have said. And for us, we are investing, across both platforms and products. I think on the earlier side, it's helpful to think about kind of a platform approach, as Jonathan said, around kind of de-risking, creating optionality too for a platform that could be leveraged for B&D that could then kind of, fund the rest of the pipeline. I think these are all kind of healthy ways to de-risk and create optionality. But, on the flip side, we also have done and continue to look at, pure product plays where you can be much more focused, more disciplined around where the capital is allocated to fund to a meaningful inflection point. I always find it hard to come up with inflection points around, a pure platform. If you think about a product, that's much easier to kind of crystallize. So for us, we do across both, pretty much stays agnostic, from company creation to early clinical is where we kind of get involved. So I think that, that flexibility helps, but then at the same time with for us with the specialty around the different TAs that we invest in, so that we can actually bring a bit of value to the table, beyond just our investment.
Yeah, and if I can jump in for a minute on what Doug had just said. So, and I want to be clear, although in very wealthy capital cycles, platforms can perform well for a while. I emphasize, although I think the optionality platforms provide, most success is product focused. The only thing I would comment on is when you track when the IPO markets were reasonable, I'm not even necessarily when they were overheated, that performance of companies that are at the stage where they can transfer risk to the public investors, those that had a pipeline, whether driven by serial acquisition and in licensing into the company so that there was a hedge, or those with a platform with the ability to generate more novel compounds that could address different indications, those pretty routinely outperform single asset companies. And so and that's another capital allocation idea. If you're planning your venture round structure and it's a compelling single asset, there's nothing wrong with that, but your exit trajectory needs to be thought of probably in a different way, because the world responds in different capital vehicles to those different strategies. The broad-based platform that sells its promise in a hot market. Most of those have really performed very, very poorly over time.
Yeah, and ultimately the value, it is a bit of a cliche, but the value of the platform lies in the products that it yields, right? So
got to do something.
Over time on product companies, anyways, right? And
yeah,
that continues to be true.
Yeah.
Terrific. Good discussion. So I mean, I think we're coming into the home stretch, as it were, of our discussion. So I'd like to actually just kind of pitch a provocative. I don't know if provocative is the right word, but so basically, if you had a chunk of money to launch a fund, which would you choose, specialist or hyper targeted? And again, we've had this discussion that maybe it's meaningless to have that definition, but what would you do with that? How would you pitch that bag of money, as it were? If I can just very quickly, around the table. I mean, Willem, you're not an investor, but I mean, how would you like to see that money allocated?
Yeah, I think the remarks that have been made about the importance of the unmet need is still key, because the unmet need will be protecting you against all the outside factors that could be a point, whether it's regulations in the US or whether it's something else, clinical trial directives, etc. So the unmet need will be a driver in how that fund would be structured. And in the rare disease field, my feel is that the rare disease field, as also Esther explained, has multiple indication areas. So you're still spreading your risk over different disease areas. So I would make a plea for more rare disease funds. So I'll definitely put my 100 million in unmet needs there. And then we'll take it for there. But I'm happy to listen to other suggestions.
Great, thanks, Morgan.
Yeah, for me, it would be a specialist sort of setup. I think it's a really interesting way in order to, cast a wider net to be able to capture all the different opportunities you could potentially see, and be able to stay in the front edge of the science, be able to be on the cutting edge there, but also from the ability to avoid downturns in therapeutic areas, but also minimize your risk in those sort of situations, being able to build a diversified portfolio.
Great, thanks. And Bauke?
Yeah, it sounds a bit boring, but I wouldn't disagree with what mentioned earlier. I think putting too many restrictions on and focusing on one rare disease as a fund strategy is probably not the way that I would choose to go about it. But at the same time, recognizing that it's helpful to build a certain expertise within the investment team and advices that you bring to the table, right? So I think that for us has certainly yielded success, and we see companies appreciate that. But limiting too much seems like a way to kind of miss out on opportunities that could be very successful, because ultimately the function of a fund is to return money to the LPs and create value, with the aim of obviously building products that could meet the unmet need, and I think that's probably where I'd kind of go.
Great. And I know, Esther, you don't represent the VC or the CVC, but I'm just curious, if you were to be in that.
Oh
position.
yeah, I would love to have this amount of money, and I already know what I would invest it in. But no, I think always with the rare disease I look at a lot of technologies. I'm a scientist by training, obviously, so I get very excited with science, and I think it's like, what's coming next? I would like to enable these technologies that could be life-changing for many people. So for example, if we were to be able to do in utero treatment of correct the sickle cell disease mutation, or any other rare disease that have devastating manifestation at birth, that would not only apply for rare diseases, but where there is a high unmet need, but at the end could translate to many other diseases, right? So I look at the lenses of also what if we now invest in extrahepatic nanoparticles, particles. Instead of everything going to the liver and potentially generating toxicity, can we just make it to target the organ of interest for a specific disease, or just actually edit those mutations, correct those mutations that are the cause of many diseases? So, you know, I cannot say that I would be hyper-targeted, like always with the rare disease lenses, but like I want to provide solutions to patients. So I always think of the translatability to as many rare disease patients or even common diseases down the line.
And I've left you, Jonathan, to last because I'm sure you've got very strong opinions in terms of.
You know what they say about surgeons: they're often wrong, but they're never in doubt. But what I would say is that I think all of us, medtech, health tech, or biopharm and biotech, have binary outcomes in our portfolio. I think when you're hyper specialized, you've multiplied binary outcome by binary outcome. Because I think it was Morgan who said it. You do run the risk of a protracted down cycle for whatever reason: clinical reversal, regulatory reversal, technology reversal. So I'm a much greater fan of the specialist fund, because I think that really enhances the functionality we spoke about: sourcing, diligence, structuring, monitoring, and exiting. But I'll say it again: I think that even if you have a larger broad-based fund, those funds should have verticals of specialization, because if you can aggregate knowledge in an area, whether it's medtech, whether it's rare disease, et cetera, then I think you have a higher chance of being, the conductor of an excellent orchestra. And I do, at the end of the day, think that's the investor's job.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. This has been really, really fantastic conversation. So I mean, we've got, I think, 4 minutes left. I'm not really sure if we should kind of field questions from the audience. If there are any kind of questions, we would be happy to field those. I don't know if there are. I can't actually see any. So yeah. So no. I mean, this has been a really good discussion. We've basically covered a lot. So strategy, structure, dynamic market dynamics, returns, and looking at what gives you the edge, as it were, and the different players, GPs, LPs. So basically, we've tried to cover a lot in the discussion, and I think we've managed actually to cover quite a bit here. So and obviously, I mean, there's no one size fits all, as has been kind of alluded to here. So I think it's been a very good discussion. So I don't know, Nadia, should we ask? I mean, are we expecting questions coming in, or?
I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but the participants have stayed with us, so everyone's been enjoying the discussion.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, just kind of final comments. If anybody has any kind of burning, statement that they would like to make. I mean, like takeaways for people to take away. I think please. We've got 2 minutes left in that respect. I mean, for our part, I could say that we started very broad. And we found that, I think, and in a way, it actually reflects the knowledge map out there. People basically are understanding of what is, in terms of disease, as it were, is becoming more detailed. So our ability to actually specialize is following that, as it were. So that I mean, for our purposes, we have decided to focus on things that we feel that we do have a good hands around, as it were. And so yeah, but that's speaking for our part, as it were. And sorry.
For the entrepreneurs in the webinar, I would say continue to look for the right match and that understands what you're doing, and come see us in Bergen at the LSX in 2 weeks.
I'm going to make perhaps one comment, wearing my entrepreneur hat for a moment, and I think everybody on this call will agree. One of the greatest ways for a venture fund to continue to learn is to always be responsive to and respectful of entrepreneurs who put their stake totally on the line. And we have the luxury of a pool of capital. And I would love to see an even greater mutual respect for saying no with explanation, saying yes with caution, and building knowledge that way. And I think we really need to applaud the entrepreneurial community for taking the risks that they take and treat them accordingly.
Absolutely, completely agree and applaud that, Jonathan. Absolutely, 100%. So,
Farzad, so there's two quick questions. So there's a question all around for early career investors. So what is your advice and which skills to double down on? And then a question on any thoughts on tech bio/AI platforms as well.
sorry, I just got something on the chat, but if you could just repeat the questions again, please.
Yeah, sure. So there's two questions came on there's a Q&A box and also the chat. So there was one all around for early career investors. So what is your advice and which skills to double down on as an early career investor?
So I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean by early career.
So as in, I guess, they're early in their career as an investor. So maybe they're starting off as an analyst.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and the question was,
which
it was
skills
just,
to develop?
Yeah.
sorry?
Which skills to double down on? And I think if you are indeed early in your career as an investor, then maybe as an analyst or an associate, then I can imagine that there's some advice that the others might have.
So which strategy basically to take? I mean, is that the question? I mean, focusing or diverse, is that the question?
I can maybe try to start answering a little bit, and curious to hear the other panelists. I think there are the classical technical skills that I guess any investor in your early career will kind of go through. I think the thing that I've learned over in the first few years is building and maintaining a network of entrepreneurs, investors, advisors, KOLs, industry experts. I think that's crucial. Kind of across the different steps that Jonathan highlighted around what the role of the VC is around identification, execution, managing and exiting. I think that's key. So yeah, maintaining a network, I think, has been useful.
Yeah, I think I get the question now. So I think really, as Jonathan said, it's important to know and appreciate, the people that you're talking to. And I think it's very important. And basically, we, for our part, we try to be on, and obviously you're working with very competent people. So you need to match their level of ability, because otherwise, if you don't have that, you're basically losing that respect, as it were, and that performance. So I think it's and as Bouke said, I mean, having the right network to be able to supply that need is very important.
Yeah, maybe one other thing I would add, and echo what you both said in terms of being able to maintain your network. But I think another thing that's quite important is getting to the point where you have conviction in what you see, what you say, what your decisions are. I think, and then being able to have the backup for that and why you believe a certain investment's a positive investment or why you want to decline an investment, I think is very important to be able to articulate.
And I'll just go back as well to the idea that the investment process is not simply financial. It's not simply technology. It's not simply EQ about management. It's got to be the synthesis of all of those things to create a successful outcome. So focus on what you know best coming in, but don't be arrogant about that singular importance, and make sure that you really absorb all of those other assessment capabilities so that the holistic approach to a company and you're being able to help the company is developed over time. And good judgment comes from experience, which comes from really bad judgment. So it does take a long time.
Great, thanks. And I think there was two questions, Nadia, was it not? Or that you...
There was also one on kind of any thoughts on tech bios/AI platforms.
So, I mean, I can start. I mean, we actually, so when it comes to tech, that's actually one of the things that we've left out, precisely of the reasons that Jonathan said, because that's not something I mean, basically on our fourth fund, we have decided to purely focus on therapeutics, with the exception of enabling technologies like biomarkers and so on. But that's precisely based on the fact that we would like to stick at things that we feel comfortable with, that we can do, as it were. And that's very important because, as I said, you have to match, you know, the opposite party on the other side of the table, as it were.
Yeah, and I can just add, you know, think about the product you're building, the problem you're addressing, the unmet need that you're trying to solve for, right? A platform for the sake of a platform, I think, is always a little hard to assess and hard to get comfortable around for us. So it needs to actually, you know, solve an issue and a problem that exists, you know, either across the pharma value chain or within kind of the patient unmet need.
Great. And I can actually see one question on the chat. It says, with the FDA uncertainty, how likely is it for you to invest in an innovative lab automation tech for drug testing and development? And what is the best way to approach a VC to fund your idea as an attendee in a conference or online? Very early stage. So I think, you know, I think if you're very early stage, you know, you have, for us, a key element is TPP, target product profile. So you have to start with the product in mind, regardless of how early you are, basically to be able to showcase, you know, what kind of universe you're actually entering into in terms of, and not only actually, you know, talking about this at the current setting, but because given that it is early stage, you're talking about the future. So it will have to have value and relevance, you know, 5, 6, 7 years in the future. So that would be my to have that TPP as clear and defined as possible. So I think we've actually gone 7 minutes over time.
Yes. Yes, we have. Thank you so much, Farzad. Thank you so much, all the panelists and all our attendees. It's been a great discussion, and thank you, Farzad, for, you know, putting this topic and this panel together. Really, really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you very much for everyone for participating.